I never seen such desolation. I think we drove for a mile and there wasn't a building hardly standing.
Nobody knew what was going on. They called the situation fluid, but fluid means that nobody knew anything.
It was different. If I had done something else, I don't know what I would have done.
We're talking today with Sherman Christensen of Granville, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. All right, Sherman, start us off at the beginning. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Covington, Kentucky in the 24th of February, 1988.
All right. Did you grow up there or did you move around?
I was actually adopted when I was 2,
Okay.
so we moved right away to Pikeville, Kentucky, and then when I was 6, my parents moved us out west to Utah, so my dad could teach chemistry out there. We lived there for about 9-10 years, and then early 2000s we moved to northern Michigan, to Petoskey.
All right. And why did you do that?
Teaching, again. He was teaching at a university down in Cedar City, Utah, and then found a community college that was just a better deal for him, so he went there and really liked it.
All right. And so where did you go to high school?
Petoskey.
Okay.
Yeah, Petoskey, Michigan.
Okay. Were you kind of a townie in Petoskey? Because is there a town versus resort population thing there, or?
Yeah, well, I guess because Petoskey is a resort town, so we have a population, give or take, between like 6,000 or 8,000, and we lived right on the outskirts. I mean, like the road outside my house was the city boundary, so I'd say I was a townie. And then, you know, in the summer that like doubles or triples, so it gets a little crazy up there.
Right. Okay. And what year did you finish high school?
2006.
Okay. Now, so what do you remember about 9/11?
Well, I was homeschooled at the time because that happened the year after we moved. So I guess we actually moved up in 2000, and we didn't have a television yet. But my mom and I were heading back from the state park because I was working on some school projects there, and the lady on the radio like cut the music off and was like, you know, we have an announcement and stuff. And I just remember that like. My mom remembered from like 91, and so the attack on the Trade Center then, and so she knew something big was going on. And I mean, I knew it wasn't good, obviously, but was I like 13 at the time, 14 at the time, so it's like you don't really completely understand, but all I remember is wanting to see what was going on, and we had no television.
Right.
Like we had nowhere, like we went, my mom called my dad at the college because it was like his first year technically teaching there, and he was trying to figure out how to get us a place where there'd be a TV for us to like just to see, because you know the radio, they never have the, you know, the breaking news, but yeah, I remember we were driving home and that's when I found out about it. And it was just a pain because I probably didn't get to see the news for about a week to get like constant updates, because that's something you just want to hear about, you know. So that was crazy.
All right. Now, yeah, so you're really kind of in an unusual situation with the whole homeschooling thing and all the rest of it. And so it's not like you have a school and a class that you're there and then they're all there together and that sort of stuff. All right. Now, and then as you go on, we go from 9/11, and then there's the invasion first of Afghanistan, and then 2003 going into Iraq and so forth. Did you, as you were getting a little bit older, were you kind of paying attention to that stuff and following it?
Yeah, I actually don't remember the invasion of Afghanistan as much. I don't remember if it just wasn't publicized as much.
Well, it was still pretty early, and you may still have been in your kind of limited communication state.
That was, I think that was kind of, I remember hearing that we were invading. I watched the invasion along with plenty of Americans, I'm sure, of Iraq, and I remember they had like the cameras set up and then you could see the flashes from the missiles and stuff hitting. And that was, I mean, at the time I was like, you know, you're kids, so you think it's the coolest thing ever, not really understanding what's technically going on. So I remember following that pretty heavily my last 2 years of high school, because by then I knew I'd wanted to serve. I just didn't know which branch yet.
Okay, so tell me about that. At what point do you decide, or what do you think motivates you to decide that you want to go in the service?
Well, I had always been a really big fan of history as it was. I don't really think my homeschool leaned more towards history, but I just gravitated towards that subject. And so, like, I grew up reading books about, like, George Washington and all those, iconic heroes, I guess, of the early Americas. And I just thought, like, I could do that, and when you're little, you're like, I'm going to be in the Army and or I want to be a police officer and stuff. And that was kind of me. And it was interesting, though, because the only person that I have in my family that served was my grandfather, who never talked about it. So it's not like I really had a role model, per se. It's just something I just always wanted to do, I guess.
All right. And so then, do you go and enlist right out of high school, or what do you do?
I started talking to the recruiter my sophomore year. I saw one of them in there, and so it was the Marine Corps recruiter. And I just remember I was sitting there. By that time, I knew there were different branches, and I wanted to be in the infantry was my thing. I don't know why. Originally, I wanted to be a pilot, a fighter pilot for the Air Force. Eyesight wasn't that, it's not terrible, but it's not 20/20. And I'd been told, like everybody, that, they could correct it or something, which I don't know, maybe they will. But then I also found out the percentage of people who become a fighter pilot, and I was like, well, I don't want to get stuck flying a cargo plane. It's not that I doubted my abilities, but when the odds are against you that heavily, it's just, and I had no problem serving in the infantry. And so I think my junior year, I actually approached my parents because I wasn't 18 at the time, and they wouldn't sign the papers. So 4 days after my 18th birthday, I signed my papers and went down, and I'd been talking to Sergeant Parks at the time, who's the Marine Corps recruiter out of Grayling, and he helped me get everything situated and on my way.
Okay. Now, so your parents didn't want to sign so you could go in early. Now, did they just want you to finish high school first, or?
No, actually, my parents were hoping I would serve a mission for my church. My eldest brother had, and so had my father. It's just kind of our church's tradition. It is a 2-year mission, and I chose not to because that just wasn't what I wanted to do at the time. And so they weren't too happy, to say the least, but I think it worked out for the best.
Okay. So it wasn't necessarily that they were against the idea of you going into the military, or did they have any kind of I don't know, are your parents sort of older and kind of would remember Vietnam and that kind of thing, or?
Yeah, I want to say that they would definitely remember Vietnam. I don't think they technically have anything against the military. It would seem that way from how upset, and it went through my whole career. It wasn't just like a one-time thing. Like, they just were never happy about it, which is funny because my recruiter was always told me, he's like, parents are like this a lot at the beginning, and it's because they don't understand what's going on, and they're just assuming you're gonna, we're gonna send you out there and leave you to die or something. And he's like, they'll come around. And I was like, okay, you've done this, I'll trust you. And it wasn't so much like that for me, which which made it hard, I guess, at the beginning until you just finally accept, this was the choice I made, and you're not always going to make your parents happy.
Yeah.
So,
and of course, parents will worry.
Oh, definitely. And that was a big part of it. And I tried to explain to my parents, I'm in the reserves. They don't get called up very often. And then shortly after, all the reserves are going. And I was like, which was fine because I wanted to go, but it didn't really help with my parents.
Okay. So you sign up, and initially it's for the reserve. So once you've signed the papers and so forth, then what do they do with you next?
After I signed, I was in the what the Marine Corps calls the pulley program, and I'm assuming it just stands for your pool of people waiting to go. And so every month it was kind of like the reserves anyways. Like I would meet up with the recruiting staff, and they would run us through just some basic exercises, trying to get you in shape and make sure you're ready before they send you to boot camp, and make sure you can pass at least the minimum requirements.
Yeah. What sort of physical condition were you in when you went in?
I hadn't played any sports in high school, because when we moved up here, one of the big things for our high school was playing sports during the summer, and all their games were on Sunday, and my parents didn't want us to play. So I actually, when I joined, I wasn't like in terrible shape, but I wasn't in definitely by any means in excellent shape. So like I was in for 6 months before I went, because yeah, like I said, I actually signed my papers in February, and then I left in the summer. And so I had like 6 months where I was out running and doing pull-ups and push-ups and just getting in shape. So, I mean, I was definitely above the average going into boot camp, but by no means was I anywhere near what I was when I got out.
Right. Okay.
So,
now, where do you go for boot camp?
I was in MCRD in Camp Pendleton out in California.
Okay.
And MCRD is the Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego.
Right. And so physically, though, but those are two physically separate facilities, or at least
Yeah,
there's one sort of in San Diego, and then Pendleton's kind of out there in the desert someplace.
Yeah, it's I mean it's a big base. It's all over the place, but we actually go up north for a month of our 3-month training.
Right. Okay. So you've got basically one whole 3-month training package. It's not separated into pieces the way it had been in the Vietnam era or something.
No, thankfully. We had I joined, and then on the 24th of July was when I left in the evening. I got picked up by the recruiter, or the drill instructor, I guess, during the night. So it's all the first few days of boot camp were just so messed up, because we were awake, I guess. We found out by the end we were awake for 72 hours. You don't feel like it because you're so stressed anyways, and your adrenaline's pumping, and half the time, well, you've never ever been yelled at like that before, so nothing gets you ready for it. But so yeah, it was definitely a culture shock.
All right. Now, just in the Vietnam era, the standard thing is you fly into San Diego, and then you get picked up there, and maybe they start yelling at you there, maybe they yell at you with the bus, or maybe they don't yell at you until the bus gets out to the depot. I mean, how did it work when you did it?
We were actually in the USO at the San Diego airport waiting, because our flight, I came in with a couple other guys, and basically throughout the day you just have more recruits showing up. And so we were just waiting for the buses to show and pick us, which we didn't actually know. Well, we didn't realize how close we were. I mean, like, it's the airport, the fence, and there's the recruit depot. And so the buses, you know, they picked us up and at night, and then they had us put our heads down, because they don't, I mean, you'll get, by the end of boot camp, you understand, like, if you really wanted to try and run away, you knew where to go, because the PET fields were right next to the airstrip. But they had us put our heads down, so you don't know where you're going. And they drove us around. Like, that was the funny thing. We drove around for quite a while before we got there, so we thought we were really far away, and it wasn't at all. But the drill instructor that picked us up, he didn't yell when he was in the USO. And I think it's because you have other people, you have other service members besides, and a couple of their families were there. But he's definitely very stern and, like, down to business. Yeah, and so we got on the bus, and then you know, they tell you to sit down, be quiet, and and then it's just dead silence for the ride for like 45 minutes. Then we stopped. They stopped periodically too. Like, the whole point is just to confuse you where you're going. And so you know, after we'd stopped a couple times, it's always silent, and then all of a sudden it's like all hell broke loose. And he's just screaming, and, you know, like, get off the bus. And so at first you don't, like, recognize it, because you're just not, like, you're like, what in the world's going on? And then, like, you see all these people scrambling. Of course, everybody tries to get out at once, so then it makes it that much worse. And then as you got off the bus is when they wrote a number on us, and that was our platoon that we were going to be in, because they just kind of section you off by, like, the first 200 or whatever their platoon sizes are going to be. And so he was bad enough, but then you have a whole group of them waiting for you when you get off the bus, and then they put us on the yellow footprints and read us. They have like a creed and everything above the door that's talking about like millions have come before you and only few have made it through, and you're standing in the footsteps of great lineage and stuff, and so it gets you really motivated to go get yelled at for 3 months and just get crushed. And it was
How much of that had you expected?
I went to which is funny, they try and get you ready, they try and give you a taste of what you're going to see. Sometimes we had a weekend boot camp style pulley program just before I came, and they actually had the families show up, and they brought a drill instructor from California out to talk to us. And so I'd had a taste of what one drill instructor could do, and at the time I thought he was pretty intense, but I later realized that he completely toned it down. Like, he wasn't even near as loud as he could get, and I think it was so he didn't shock the parents into like, my kid's not doing that. You weren't ready. That was the easiest thing to say. You're just not ready. There's no way. You're not used to being scrutinized every minute of every day. You're not used to being watched every minute of every day. And they see everything. It's amazing what they catch, but they catch it all. So it was, yeah, wow.
All right. So the first 72 hours or whatever, they're just marching you around, and you're getting all of this. You get gear issued. They shave your head or whatever, and that kind of thing.
A lot of paperwork actually was our first one. We have a 13-week boot camp because the first week is actually like medical, making sure you get your shots. They double check that you're physically ready, and at the end of that, you'll take your first. It's like a half PFT sort of, and so you have to make like. They cut everything in half, and you have to at least get that far. Like for the run, you have to make 1.5 miles in 12.5 minutes or less. And so the first 3 hour, 72 hours, 3 days, we just signed so many papers. It's literally, the joke is you're signing your life away, because I signed, dated, initialed so many papers. It's ridiculous. And so that's what they do. We were actually in a room. They shave you periodically they'll take you out to they get your head shaved and a few things like that, but for the most part we were sitting in the same room. And the thing is, after, of course, after the fact, they're like, yeah, it's always funny to watch you guys, because you don't know what to do, because they told you don't do anything unless we tell you to do it. So you're sitting there, and they're like, yeah, we never understand why you guys don't ever just try and sleep there. And we're like, well, because you're going to come flying out of the middle of nowhere. And that's what they do. They like to leave you alone a lot of times, or leave you alone, in quotes, because you think you're alone. You're never alone. But they'll disappear, and they just watch you.
All right. Now, had you done all of your aptitude testing or things like that before that? Or?
Yeah. When we go down to a place, MEPS, down in Lansing is where I went, and you'll take your ASVAB and your official ASVAB score, which is just tests all sorts of aptitude tests. And then based off of that is what you can get in your job, your MOS. And I scored decently. There wasn't any job that was closed to me because of my score. I didn't score. I think the highest is like 100 or 99 or something. So,
So you had options, but you were perfectly happy to go infantry. So.
Yeah. Well, I had options had I gone active.
Okay.
And I technically had options going reserve, but the recruiter kind of steered me towards the road of infantry, because everywhere in Michigan's infantry, I think there's a engineer company down in Battle Creek, but I hadn't heard about it, and I've never done anything with them, so I don't even know if they're technically affiliated with my unit. So Michigan, the reserves is typically leans heavily towards the infantry side, because that's what they'd want replaced.
All right. Okay, now you get through your first week. So you've now, is there a routine that you've gotten used to, or just you've gotten used to being told what to do?
You get used to being told, well, you don't even get used to being told. There is really no getting used to it. That's by the end of boot camp, you'd say you kind of get how things work, but they're constantly changing. And the thing is, like, you like hurry up and wait is kind of the joke, but they like rush you somewhere, and then sometimes you just be there, you know, and all you're doing is waiting. You don't know why, but eventually it's like, oh, we're going to medical. But sometimes they'd switch it on purpose, I feel like, or they'd wait till the last like 5 minutes. It's like, we need to be across the base, and it's like, well, this sucks. So they're constantly keeping you on your toes for 3 months. I mean, really, you get the idea. It's going to be early mornings every day for the rest of your life. And for most of us, right out of high school, it's like, I miss my Saturdays and stuff.
All right. What sorts of people were you training alongside you?
Well, MCRG, the Marine Corps is still male, female.
Mm-hmm.
So I was on the West Coast, which is only male, and then the East Coast has a female side of the base. So I had no females with me, but most of the guys were about my age. I mean, every once in a while, you'd have the ones I like to call the daddies, who were definitely older, and it didn't seem to phase them as much because they've kind of lived through life a bit. I mean, we called him the old man, and he was like 32. That's not old, but at the time you're like, wow, you're old. So, but it didn't seem like it was as tough for him, I think, mentally, because that's where the real struggle comes in with boot camp.
Now, did he ever tell you anything about why he was there?
I think he was a police officer at the time and had lost his job or something. And so, yeah, it was always interesting to me because throughout my career, I bumped into, like, I've been in charge of guys who were 10 years older than me. And it's always just kind of intrigued me why at that point in your life you'd choose to go. Because typically, the military is more of a young man's, especially on the infantry side, it's more of a young man's deal. But they could do it. I mean, I never had one that, was, most of the time they're actually better than the younger guys, And I think it's a lot of the mental components that they just have more resources available to themselves to where it just doesn't faze them as much.
All right. And for the other guys, did you have, the younger ones, did you have a sense of why they were there or why they'd enlisted?
Yeah, I mean, that was the one question I think we all were like, I hate getting that question because it's like, why did you join, And then you always get like the answers like, oh, because 9/11 and things like that, and that was never my answer because I was like, 9/11 was terrible and everything, but I couldn't honestly lean towards that. I think that might have just stemmed from my own wanting it to be more than just that. Like I wanted it to actually be for something. I don't know. But for most of them, I feel like it was just kind of one of those things like, well, my dad, a lot of the guys I went to had parents who had served, and so that's why there's just kind of like a family tradition.
Yeah.
A lot of them were kind of like me, where it's like, well, I don't really know why I joined. It's just something I always wanted to do, sort of thing. So it was a good mix of like everything. I think there were a couple guys though who were there, and I mean, they shouldn't have been. Definitely, I still don't know why. One of the kids I went to boot camp with, I actually deployed with, and he was from the other side of the country, and I still couldn't tell you why he joined. He hated every minute of it. He hated boot camp. He hated, when we joined the fleet, he just hated it, and I have no idea why he was there, because it's a volunteer, so don't volunteer, it's kind of what I was thinking.
All right. Now, for yourself, how well did you, or effectively did you adapt to that life?
I think I did all right. I did pretty good, actually, because I was saying with my parents, like my one thing was I couldn't fail. That was my number one thing. And it wasn't even so much for my parents as much as for myself, but definitely I didn't want my parents to have that I told you so factor thing. So I did, I tried my hardest to fit, make it fit me. And, the Marine Corps' old adage where they break you down and build you up, like I just kind of embraced that, and it's like, you're terrified half the time and you clearly don't know, and throughout the weeks you could see yourself progressing and getting better, and so I loved it.
All right. Now, were there other guys who just sort of pushed back more, or?
Yeah, you see it a lot in like the first phase, like the first 5 weeks. Well, really you see it like the first week, and they've usually crushed them by then. But every once in a while you'll get one who's really stubborn, and like he'll do what he's supposed to when they're around, but you still see him revert back to his old ways when he's by himself or when the drill instructors aren't around. And those ones always bothered me, just because, you know, it's like, what if I have to go to combat with you and you're not in the mindset or something? So he, yeah, they, I actually have a guy in mind for it, but, so it's like some of them, some guys didn't conform too well, but they get rid of them. You know, the drill instructors are pretty good at picking people out, I think, relatively quickly, because, I mean, it's just kind of one of those things, like, you can tell the people who want to be there because they'll take it, you know what I mean, without complaint, and then the guys who don't really want to be there, you see them pushing back and kind of rebelling, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Now, if they do wash somebody out, are they basically going to be out of the Corps at that point, or do they take somebody and they start them back at the beginning again?
It kind of depends. There's a whole slew of ways that we think they do it, but I mean, if you, sometimes people get legitimately broke, and so they can get, depending on the injury, they can get put in a medical platoon, and then it's just once they get better, they'll pick up with a different company at that time of their phase or whatever they were at. If you leave because you choose, to the best of my knowledge, you're done. The Corps won't take you back even if you ask. And then, you know, so basically, or if you get, basically that's it. Like, you either quit or you get broken, you know. Once, what happens to you after, I mean, there were kids, we picked up a guy at like the second phase who'd been injured for like 6 months, and the Corps still kept him. So it just kind of depends, I think, on the individual cases, and then how hard the individual pushes to get out if they're sick or injured, and vice versa, because one of the worst things you can do for somebody who wants to get out is to keep them in, you know what I mean? And technically, a lot of times, that's sort of, I mean, it's kind of what you feel like happens, because when, you know, you sign the contract, it's a contract, you know, and they're not really easily broken. But at the same time, it's like, man, you're not going to want that person with you if, you know, push comes to shove sometimes. So that's kind of, yeah, it sort of depends on the situation. Like, most of the time, though, they'll find a way to keep you, especially, I mean, most of the people there want to be there, you know. So if you somehow wash out and, you know, for medical reasons, they'll keep you. They'll do everything they can to keep you. But if you choose to quit, they don't want you.
All right. So what proportion of the platoon that you started with finished on schedule?
We started with like 140, and I think we graduated like 80 or 79, something like that.
All right. And so you have some who do break down or wash out or whatever, and they're pretty serious about getting people who are going to be ready to go on.
Yeah, which, you know, thinking back now, it's really interesting, because you don't notice, I guess, which you'd think you'd notice a 50% reduction in personnel, but honestly, you're so busy with everything else that it's like the end of second phase, third phase, and you're like, wow, we don't have anybody anymore.
All right. Break down the phases for us. What are you doing first phase, second phase, third phase?
Basically, from what I remember, I'm no expert, but first phase is more of just like general knowledge sort of stuff, like marching, instant obedience to orders. A lot of the mind games they play, you hear about, is a lot during first phase, because that's where they're trying to break you down. Then you'll go up north and to Camp Pendleton, and that's where you do like rifle training, a lot of like hikes with your packs and everything, just all sorts of like that. That's where kind of like the first phase they break you, the second phase they start building you up. That's where you start building confidence in yourself, in your team, in the Corps. In the third phase, it kind of all comes together. We move back down to MCRD. You do a lot of like the customs and courtesy sort of training, guard duty, you learn all about like interior guard and things like that, and then you'll graduate, and that's where you kind of hone your skills.
Okay. Now, were there any components of the training that were sort of geared toward Iraq or Afghanistan at all?
That would probably be more of the second phase, because that's where you do a lot of like the fire teams, and it's really rudimentary because we also have our MOS schools that will learn it all, but they give you basic ideas of like fire team squads and a couple like basic maneuvers that they can do, But mainly it's to teach you. I mean, I guess the easiest, probably the simplest way is like first phase is to get rid of your bad habits. Second phase is to teach you their habits, and the third phase is to make sure you know them.
Okay. So you understand what you're supposed to be doing. And
Exactly.
Okay. Now, since you're a reservist, you've done your 3 months or whatever. Do you go home, or do you get another phase of training next?
Well, after boot camp, we went home for 10 days on leave, and then you go to your MOS school. So I was out at back up at Camp Pendleton at School of Infantry. So.
Okay, and how long a program is that?
That was 2 months.
Okay, and now what are you doing?
Like right now?
But no, I mean now in your story, like at those 2 months.
That's where you'll get your individual MOS. You have like 2 weeks of basic infantry skills, which is like the rifleman shooting and things like that. And then after those 2 weeks, you will basically be split off into your MOS. Like I'm an 0341, which is a mortarman. We have 0311s, which are riflemen, 0351s, which are assaultmen, and then 03, I don't know if I said 31s, but it's machine gunners.
All right. Now, do you cross-train on the different weapons?
Yeah, you'll definitely, that's kind of the first week.
Okay.
You'll kind of get a feel for a lot of things. Like we shot 240s and everything, and then, but throughout while you're at SOI, it's mainly focused strictly on your weapon system.
All right.
So the 11s went off and did all the room clearing practice and stuff, and like we would go out to a soccer field and practice manipulation of the mortar system until you get, you figure out how to get it right. But throughout your Marine Corps career, you'll definitely cross-train on a lot of them.
All right. Now, the mortars is an old and venerable weapon. I mean, was the technology or whatever level, was it basically like using what you might have used in Vietnam or something? Or is it higher tech now in terms of aiming and things like that?
Honestly, I don't think it was much different. I mean, the idea is still the same because we didn't have, it doesn't come, like, it's not a computer, you have a site you'll look into, and that has the crosshairs. I mean, you put your two stakes out, your aiming stakes out there, and you'll get the data that you manipulate on the site, and then you move the mortar system to get it level. You'll have two level bubbles, and then you'll try and get those centered. And I mean, that's basically because you're trying to, that's the hard part about learning it, is that you're trying to figure out that it's not just one level. Like you have to go left and right and up and down and make sure it's right. So, but for the most part, I would say it's probably, from what I've seen, pretty close to what they had in Vietnam. Just recently, though, they're actually phasing out the tubes. A couple of my buddies in my unit went to kind of like an info session, if you will, where they showed some of the new weapons that the Marine Corps is looking at possibly adopting. I mean, they're not like brand spanking new high tech, I'm sure, but like they're lighter tubes and things like that. So it's just some interesting stuff that's coming out.
And when you're actually aiming and setting ranges, are you still using sort of manual controls, and you've got still adjusting?
It's they're little dial wheels that you just twist, and I mean it's simple because I know how to do it, and it's simple in the idea of it as well. There's some more complex systems out there for sure. And I mean, it's you want it as simple as possible. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, and you want it to work.
It definitely. And computers are faulty. They started. Thing is, like, most of the math for like mortars and stuff it's usually done by somebody else, like a human in general. And they started trying to phase in some handheld computers, and we hated them, just hated them. It's like, we'll rather suffer through trying to crunch numbers in our heads and stuff. And I mean, it's nothing like crazy, it's just a lot of adding or subtracting and stuff, you know, but it's, one number can mean the difference between life or death, so it's important. But yeah, it's something I think that's just left as simple as possible, the better.
All right. Now, when you're in the infantry school and so forth, you're in for that 2 months after the boot camp. Do they treat you differently than they did in boot camp?
They say they do. It wasn't the same. It definitely was not the same, because you're not constantly getting yelled at. But you're still, I mean, you're a junior Marine, so the difference between you and a pulley at the beginning of SOI is, or I guess the difference between you and a recruit is 10 days. I mean, you're a Marine, you know what I mean, which is what you wanted, but you're the bottom of the barrel of the Marines, you know, and you're still technically in school, so you don't get, like, there were still rules, like, you couldn't use your cell phones until you're on libo on the weekends, and you may not get libo, so sometimes you'd still go without seeing your, or talking to your families and stuff, which, I mean, isn't really that big of a deal. Some guys had tough times, mostly for, like, their girlfriends or something dumb. But, yeah.
Okay. All right. So you've kind of, now you've completed that phase of training. But then if you were going active duty, you'd go to a duty station, but you're a reservist. So now what happens to you?
Yeah, that was, like, the best part, though, because the reserves have a rep for, like, it's not, they just have a bad rep from the active duty guys, like, they don't do anything and stuff. And it was really funny because there's a couple of us who were in the reserves, and all through SOI, everybody talks, you know, crap to you and tries to make fun of you. But the day we graduated was also the day you leave, for the most part. And so I remember after the graduation, like, okay, go change over. If you're in the reserves, go get in civvies and everything. And for some reason that day, everybody hated us even more, because when we were getting on we had, like, huge buses for, like, 4 guys. We were getting in to go home, and they were getting picked up to go do, it was the best day ever. It was so funny. All of a sudden, they all wanted to be in the reserves.
Right.
They had to go for more pain, is what they envisioned. And we, you know, were definitely not so much, I guess.
Right. You know, what other question about the training thing? And in the Vietnam era and before, the Marines, among the training, was, among other things, physically violent. I mean, people would be getting hit by drill instructors and things like that, or they basically find other ways to physically discipline you, whether it was hiding somebody under a blanket and beating him up so we didn't know who did it. All kinds of stories like that. Now, is there still a physical dimension to the discipline part?
Yeah, definitely. Like, pain is a really good teacher. You know what I mean? Like, you learn when you get hurt. It's the same thing as with kids. Like, you touch a hot stove, you're probably not going to touch a hot stove. Do they come up and just punch you in the face nowadays? Not so much. Do they have more inventive ways to do basically the same idea? Kind of.
Okay.
You know,
So,
I mean, it's a lot of, they have the right to do incentive training, is what, or ITU, which is basically they go up and just haze you, and you know, you're doing, like, push-ups and sit-ups and all sorts of physical stuff. I mean, because it has a purpose, though. Definitely through, if they didn't have that, you wouldn't come out as physically fit as you do. And so it's an important part of the course. And the Marines, especially the Marine Corps, you can't be soft. You know what I mean? Like, they'll send us everywhere that everyone else doesn't want to go. So it's just kind of part of the game, you know, like a little pain now to be prepared later is worth it.
Right. Okay. Now, you're at the point when you finished your infantry training, you're going home. Now, had you been expecting that there was a likelihood that you were going to get called up and you might wind up off in the Middle East someplace?
Yeah, when I was enlisting, my recruiter said my unit's time was coming in, like, soon, and they actually ended up deploying while I was in SOI. So I had originally thought that I was going to make it as follow-on forces for my unit, but I joined, or I graduated just after they sent those guys. So I was bummed about that, but as soon as I checked into my unit, the first sergeant, when I went and had my interview with him, and he was telling me about the unit and trying to get a feel for me, he told all of us that when he talked to us that we were going to be going.
Okay. Now, what unit had you been with originally or were expecting to be with?
I joined Bravo Company 124 out of Saginaw, Michigan, and I was with them my entire enlistment.
Right.
But when I joined, 224 was set to rip 124, and they were shy a couple bodies. So.
Okay. Now decode that expression for the civilian audience. So basically you come back, the company you were going to be with out of Saginaw is gone, so they assign you to a different company instead?
Yeah, they basically lend you to, because we're all part of the same division, because I'm 124 and then 224 is out of Illinois, Chicago area, and so if they, it's just as simple as like, here we have a couple extra guys, take them, and that's basically what they needed, was a bunch of junior Marines, and that's what we had.
So what company were you then attached to?
Weapons Company.
Okay, Weapons Company, 2nd Battalion, 24th Marines.
Yes.
All right, and then do you have some time with them as a reservist before you're called up, or do they get called up pretty quickly?
No, I was home. I got home in January, and I was done with training. And by August, we had got told that we were going to for sure be leaving, so we left in September. So I drilled. I did my reserve duties with 124 because there were still components here.
Okay.
And then once 224 got their actual activation orders and everything, and they had their dates for when they were going to go do their pre-deployment training. That's when we got attached to them. So I was only with 224 like 3 days before. I mean, they picked us up on their way over.
All right.
So.
Let's see. So you said, when was this then that you were actually now activated?
In 2008.
Okay. All right. So you had initially enlisted. I guess you had. It was 2006 that you had joined the reserves originally, and then you report later in the year. So your training kind of finishes out 06 and goes into 07?
Yes.
All right. And then there's a phase after that?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
So maybe
I guess I was in 2007 is when, I
Okay.
kind of skipped that year.
Yeah.
I was just realizing that too while you were doing
that. That's why we're here as interviewers, is to do the math. All right.
Right, yeah. So I was in boot camp in SOI the end of 2006.
Yep.
And then the first half of 2007, I was with 124.
You're still with 124 and still
and
just
then
as
the
a
second
reservist.
half was my workup. So basically, every year, end of the year, I was gone. It seemed like that's what it was.
All right. Now you're now with a weapons company. Now again, what does that mean?
Well, the Bravo Company was a line company, which meant it was grunts. I mean, we're all grunts. So we had a lot of 11s. It was like 3 platoons of 11s, and you have 1 weapons platoon. Weapons Company is all the crew served weapons. So you have the 41s, 51s, 31s, and sometimes you can have well, no, that's basically it, because 52s go off on their own. 352 is a tow gunner. So we have entire platoons of machine gunners, an entire platoon of assault men in 41, instead of just a company of a mixture of each of those. And so, and we tend to, like I was on the 60 millimeter mortar when I was in my line company. The weapons company works with 81
81s, yeah. So they have the heavier weapons there too. Okay.
You usually tend to, there's like a smaller and a larger version, basically, except for the assault men, usually. I mean, I guess you can technically say they have the javelin or something, but I never saw one, so.
All right. So there's some kinds of weapons that just weren't relevant. I mean, if the enemy doesn't have aircraft or tanks, then you don't need weapons to take those out.
Yeah, and you're definitely not going to be running around with like a 50 cal in a infantry line company, because it's just too big and frankly, would be ridiculous.
All right. Okay. So what kind of pre-deployment training do you get?
I was in California, back in California again, at 29 Palms for 4 months. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Four or five, actually. It was a while. It seems like and you'll basically, every unit that the U.S. sends over for the Marine Corps has to pass, and I'm assuming it's the same for all, has to pass certain, what do you call them, you have to get checked off by another unit to make sure you're up to par with the standards of the Marine Corps for combat-wise, and so that's basically what you're doing. You go through a series of trainings, be it like room clearing, heavily leans on IED detection, combat drills, medical drills, and all sorts of those things, all working up to something called Mojave Viper, which is a culmination of all those skills. And you go through an exercise, and I mean, 29 Palms is, I think, the biggest live range fire base the U.S. owns. Like, it's huge. Like, the entire base is one massive impact zone, So we were out there doing just anything and everything to get ready.
All right. Now, were they, at this stage, were they giving you any training in terms of how to deal with the civilians or understand? If you knew you were going to go to Iraq at that point?
Yeah, we knew that's where the deployment was. Where exactly, we knew it was Al Anbar, Providence, because that's where the Marine Corps was. Mm-hmm. But where inside that, we had no idea. But we took a lot of language classes, basic language, so you can communicate what you need, like stop and stop or I'll shoot, and just basic things like where, IED or bomb or something, and then there were like advanced language courses for the guys that you felt did really well in the basic. You could send them there. You were not going to learn to be like an interpreter by any means in 4 months, but it's a little bit more helpful because sometimes we would go without a terp, which was a pain.
All right. Now you're being trained by people who've already been there because you're working with a unit that's come back? Or?
Yeah, I mean, by 2008, majority of the Marine Corps had been over at least once, if not twice or 3 times. So your instructors, everyone. I mean, we had Marine Corps instructors. We did one of the numerous weeks, but 1 week we had the Australians, because the Marine Corps does a lot with Australia, seeing as we're an amphibious assault force. They're an island. You can see why. But we did something with a Special Forces operative because he was here learning from us and vice versa. So that worked out really well. I mean, that was a lot of fun. And then you have a lot of other Marines there that have been, and they're just there to instruct and teach you on the newest like TTPs and things like that.
All right. Now, at the point when you're doing this, had the Americans started to switch into a surge strategy, or does that come later on? Honestly, I remember the surge, and I guess you could say we were probably the part of it, but we were on the tail end. I mean, I guess really because, well, no, not even. I guess because when we went over, the thing was like the Marine Corps was getting pulled out because we were refocusing on Afghanistan again. And the Marine Corps had been pulled out of Afghanistan to go fight in Iraq, and now they were taking us out of Iraq to go fight in Afghanistan again. So when we were going over, they were actually drawing down the number of Marines that were there. So we were taking over a larger portion of the country for just our battalion. So, I mean, I guess you could say we were on the tail end of it, but we weren't smack dab in the middle of all. Well, you're not into part this characteristic of it in the sense that the surge was in part a buildup of forces to have more people and more boots on the ground in certain areas, but you wound up in an area where there were fewer.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you complete the training at 29 Palms, and what do they do with you at that point?
After you pass the training, it's got time to go play the game, I guess you could say. We left the end of January 21st of 2008, and flew to Germany and then to Kuwait. We were in Kuwait for, I think, portions of the battalion were there for about 3 days, just waiting for the flights. And then once we got the planes, we flew into Iraq.
All
That
right.
was intense.
Did you remember anything about the passage through Kuwait, or you just?
Yeah, I remember it. We weren't issued any ammo before we showed up in country. The only thing you bring is your personal weapons, so like M16s, sniper rifles, things like that. But all the crew-served weapons just stay in country and get rotated through the units that come in. And so we had nothing when we showed up, which, I mean, your whole thing is like, it's just kind of how you've been trained, is you kind of see like the Middle East as a whole as the danger zone. So it was really weird getting off the plane in Kuwait, because at the time I was a Lance Corporal, so of course you're getting shoved on every working party imaginable. And I remember having to offload the plane just thinking, oh, at any time someone's going to shoot us. And I mean, it's Kuwait, so it's perfectly fine. But it's just kind of, you know, it's, for most of us, it'd been the first time a lot of the guys had ever left the country.
Right.
It was definitely the first time I'd left the country where I didn't feel safe, you know. But Kuwait was fine. But when we got on to Camp Victory, yeah, we went
Up
to Camp
by Baghdad?
Yeah. Or no, Camp Virginia, that's the one we were at in Kuwait. They issued us each like one magazine, and we just thought it was the funniest thing though, because it's not going to do anything, you know what I mean? Like, so that was like the funny part, is like, well, you're in country technically, so here's some ammo. Oh, by the way, when we flew from Kuwait to Iraq, give it back.
Okay.
And then when we landed, we got issued ammo like right off the plane. And so we were trying to load up our magazines and stuff. And I mean, it's all about safety. I mean, you know,
Right.
some crazy 18-year-old shooting a hole in a plane. It's probably been done.
All right. Now, did they land you up by Baghdad, or are you someplace?
No, we flew into TQ, Al-Taqatum, I
Okay.
believe. We always abbreviated it TQ, so it's Al-Taqatum next to Habaniya, which is probably like 15 minutes away from Fallujah.
Okay. So you are going straight to Anbar province then?
Yeah, we flew right
Which is
in.
this big western chunk of Iraq. It's a very large area, but Fallujah's there and some other towns. Okay. Now, once you've gotten there, are you joining, is your battalion all together? Or are you split up in different ways?
They'd flown the different companies at different times. That was kind of one of the reasons I think we were in Kuwait, kind of depending on when your company got left. We flew in, and I want to say for like a week the battalion was together. And then after that is when they sent the different companies to replace the unit that we were ripping.
Okay. Now, so there's already a battalion in place, and you're coming in and taking over from them. So that first week there, when you're actually in Iraq, now, is this when you get your weapons and stuff now, once you land? Or do they give them to you right before you flew out? Or
well, we had our, like our M16s and stuff,
Yeah,
like all that, we flew with, like they were with us the whole time.
Okay. But you're going to take over the weapons of the battalion, other battalion?
Yeah, like the Mark 19 grenade launchers, the 50 cals, the 240s, all the like weapon MOS's weapons, like the mortar systems and stuff, that's what we would take from them. And yeah, well, when you first, the part is like you're in country now, and so your thing is like, hey, let's go kick butt and do all that stuff. But for the first week, you can't. You have, it's just like, we call it left seat, right seat, where like the first few times the unit takes us out. and then shows us, meets like people they've made friendships with, and tells them, you know, like, hey, we're leaving, these are the guys replacing us, and they let us meet them so we can start building a rapport with their friends that they had made. And then we go from that to like, and then it's basically to show you your AO, like this is, you know, where we've had trouble, this is, you know, that's somebody to watch out for. And then they flip, and then we take them out, and they make sure, okay, they have a handle on the situation, and over the course of like a week or two, you do that, you learn, and then you get, there you go.
All right. Now, what was going to be in your own area of operations? Were you have city or town or open country? Or?
Well, originally we were in Habanilla, which is right next to the Euphrates. And so that was like a base, that was a joint base between us and the Iraqis. And then we were, a couple of the, like Fox and Fox Company and those guys were pushed out other places, like Bravo Company, or I guess Weapons technically. Weapons stayed with the battalion headquarters for a little bit because we had like vehicles and everything, and so we'd drive them around. But we would run missions through Fallujah and out in the surrounding, like it was a lot of, you had Fallujah, and then they were like smaller, I mean they weren't even so much towns as much as just little, not even a village, like it was just like randomly there'd be like 4 houses or something. You're like, this is odd. So, but I mean it was definitely, there was a large populace there.
Okay. And what was the general situation or mood like at the time, and how dangerous was it, how much was going on?
Well, they'd been making really big strides with like the Iraqis at the time, so it wasn't like, it definitely wasn't like 03 or 04 by any means. IEDs were our biggest problem, I think, at the time when we showed up, and they were, I mean, just everywhere. So that was, we didn't have some, like firefights weren't as much of the problem when I was there as much as just getting blown to pieces. But the funny thing is, the day after we got in country, the Al-Qaeda and insurgents and everybody put out this news report saying how they attacked this Marine convoy who just showed up in country and killed like 50 of us and stuff. And we thought it was hilarious because like we didn't even see anybody, you know. So that was kind of like our first taste of, it's kind of like a war of propaganda a lot of the time. And so it was just kind of funny to hear about ourselves.
All right. Now, when you got there, I mean, were you working with Iraqi forces or cooperating with them, or with any militias or things like that? Or
we had a series of, like, we had the Iraqi army that was on that base with us. We had the Iraqi police that we would deal with. Actually, we had about a small-sized platoon that went out to a police post, and that's where they were stationed for a while to work with the Iraqi police. And then, like, we would deal with the army a lot. And then, I guess it'd be part of a militia. Like, down the road from us, there were these apartment complexes, and the sheikh, whichever, who lived there kind of had his own little like militia thing going there, which was always scary because not all the time, or there were a couple times where there were some questionable children of age rolling with AKs, and it's bad enough when you're slapping 18-year-old crazies with them, let alone anybody younger than that. So yeah, the militias weren't my favorite to work with by any means, and they're also shady as it was.
All right. Yeah. I mean, now, was your unit? Now, what does the weapons company get split up into detachments and assigned to the line units, or do you stay together?
Conventionally, yeah. Conventionally, we would have just kind of been assigned to whoever needed us. But seeing as like this war was anything but, every company had its own complement of Humvees and MRAPs and things, and so we weren't needed. We were all mounted, you know what I mean? We had like the machine gunner was in the turret, and as a mortarman, I'm a rifleman who has a mortar on my back, so I was a dismount. I didn't even use the mortar system though, because like I said, we were a weapons company, and an 81, it, you know, goes up to my chest. You don't run with them. You're not going to roll with those, you know what I mean? Like, at that time, for a lot of the heavier weapons like the Mark 19, which is an automatic grenade launcher, for the 31s and like my 81s, we weren't even allowed to shoot in country anymore because of just the collateral damage. They'll mess you up big. So we couldn't even shoot those without regimental. So we were all basically like a massive battalion of 11s.
Okay, so you're basically just an infantryman after all.
Yeah, which is fine because that's what I had originally wanted to do. Like I'd never ever thought of being a mortarman. And then I found out when I was leaving for boot camp, my recruiter had switched so he could sign some other person up too, which, yeah, shady. But it's like cool. It turned out, I mean, I loved it. I loved my MOS, you know, and it was fine. But yeah, so I was happy. You know, I was running around with a 249 saw as a saw gunner. And if any of you have never shot a fully automatic rifle, it's sweet.
All right. Now, do you remember sort of some of these first patrols or whatever you go out on? I mean, the first time in the field with the guys and the first time when your unit's on your own?
Yeah, that's like it's funny, but it's terrifying too, because when they were doing the left seat, right seat, you usually, the people you want with them is obviously going to be the driver, so he learns the route, the vehicle commander, so he understands how everything works, and then eventually you're going to want the machine gunner or the turret gunner, because he's the one more likely than not that's going to be able to spot the IEDs. Well, our battalion got as many of us certified to drive Humvees before we left, not as many to drive the MRAPs, because when I came, that was when we were pushing the really big vehicles that were like anti-IEDs, you know. And so my vehicle driver was one of the few guys in our platoon that was licensed for an MRAP. Well, when they went to do their left seat, right seat, I obviously didn't need to come because I was a dismount, so I was sitting there relaxing, and my vehicle commander, Sergeant Pendleton, came busting, and he's like, "Hey, Christensen," he's like, "grab your gear." He's like, "You're coming out with us." And I was like, all right, you know, I didn't know. And so it was like maybe 10 or 11, and they only go for probably like 2 or 3 hours at the most. And I was like, well, hey, and we had just got in too, so I was unpacking, and I was like, do I need like my NVGs and stuff? He's like, no, just grab like your Kevlar or, you know, and all your other stuff. And I was okay, cool. So we left. Well, it turned out that we were pushing it back, you know. They kept pushing the time back, back. And we were on the other side of the base at this point, getting ready to leave. And I was like, you know, Sergeant Peden, like, I don't have my NVGs because it was going to be dark by the time we were leaving. And he's like, okay, well, it doesn't even matter because, you know, you're just going to be sitting there and we're just riding down a lit street and back, and it'll only take like 10 minutes. Well, turns out that my driver, at the last minute, they're like, hey, we need you to drive the MRAP. Well, they're like, oh, Christensen, that's bumping you up to driver. And I was like, okay. So I'd never left the wire before, and my first time out, I'm going to drive. Well, they're like, oh, by the way, we're going to be doing blackouts, so you're going to everybody needs their NVGs. I didn't have mine. And then our IR lights on our vehicle didn't work. And oh, by the way, Christensen, your vehicle is going to be lead Vic. So my first time out, I'm sitting there. I found out that I had to drive with NVGs, which, if you've never used them, you don't have depth perception because only one eye. So one eye is blacked out basically. The other one's this, you know, lime green, or whatever. And that I was going to be lead Vic in a pitch black night op, and it was, yeah, I was not terrified, like it was exciting, you know, like you were nervous, but I was just like, just my luck that I'm going to be lead Vic and probably get blown up, and I mean, that's just how you think. And so I was definitely white-knuckled going out the wire the first time.
All right. Now, just for your outside audience, what's the difference between an MRAP and just a Humvee?
A Humvee is like the typical ones you'd see like in the movies, like and the MRAP is it's a like really up armored, like I guess kind of like a truck. If any of them have ever seen like a 7-ton maybe, or it's just, I mean, it's like a moving truck that's just armored to all, you know, like they're the reason why we started finding 500-pound IEDs instead of like 100, because they were designed to, you know, to stop the blast and focus it outward instead of underneath from. So yeah, they're pretty heavy, and I mean they're good because they'll keep you safe. They don't have the best shocks on them. No, that's for sure.
Now, had you ever driven one before that?
I'd never driven. Never driven a 7 or a MRAP. Humvees, I took the like 4-day course. I mean, it's simple, you know what I mean? It's like driving a bigger car, which is, you know, I came from my parents who have a little Civic to trying to drive a Humvee is like, you know, going from a hatchback to a freaking Ford, you know, 250 or whatever they have.
Big pickup, yeah, something like that. Okay, so so on some level you got to be wondering, you know, what are these people thinking? I've never done any of this, and I haven't trained for it yet. Here I am driving lead vehicle. Was the patrol, in fact, just a 10-minute jaunt, or was there more to it than that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit longer than 10 minutes, and it was kind of to show us the population at night and to let us see how they react to you. I mean, one of the best ways to know when something's up is you get a feel for your area, and you kind of establish like a baseline of activity, and when it deviates from the norm, that's how you can start telling like, hey, something's weird, you know. So they were showing us like the people who like they're typically out and all this stuff, and I mean for the most part most people aren't out at night because their electric system was shot so badly that who knew when power was going to be on.
Yep. All right, so you kind of you get through that. But now, do you have what kinds of missions then did you wind up running in the time you were over there?
A lot of just standard patrols, I guess, to make sure the AO is safe. A lot of IEDs, like we'd get calls from, calls, not like they just called you, but we'd get info from the local populace and sometimes the IPs, but of like IEDs or weapons caches and stuff. And I mean, it was always funny because you would, like the IPs and stuff, you always tell the ones that were a little bit shady because they'd take you out in the middle of the desert and then they could walk right up. I mean, like, it's the middle of the desert, you know what I mean? Like, there's no visible landmarks, and somehow they could find these, like, caches, and it's just like, I don't know, dude. You're good, but probably not that good.
So what did you think was going on at that point?
Well, a lot of times the hardest part about the war was that you would help somebody who could shoot at you next week or had been shooting at you the day before, you know. So it's so hard to know who to trust. So, I mean, you're not going to say they're working for the other side, but sometimes it was just like, you know, like you don't trust anybody, you know, like you can't really, you go with it, you know, and you hope for the best. And I mean, that's kind of the advice you always give to guys coming in, is like, you don't trust them, but you work with them, you know, because you just don't know. Which, I mean, and they're not all like that, clearly, because I mean, I did post with a lot of Iraqis who were fine, but it's just, you never know when you're going to get that one, you know.
On the other hand, if they are taking you out and they are actually giving you an actual weapons cache or an IED that's real enough, okay, then on some level, whatever it is that's motivating, and maybe they had connections with the group that did it or owned that stuff or whatever, they were giving it to you.
Money does a lot over there, a lot over there. We had a JAG officer specifically for that, for when we needed to, it's not like we go out and pay people to do things, but like if we ever accidentally damaged something, like we had, you know, when some of their houses and streets are pretty narrow, so sometimes our vehicles might scrape and mess up something, and we'd repay that. But I know that there were, like the sheikh I was talking about, he was getting paid to give us info because his network was deep. So we got a lot of good info from him, things like that.
All right. Now, did you have much of a sense of kind of, you know, what your officers or commanders were doing, or like did you see much of, like, say, the battalion commander or company commander? Or?
Not a ton, but they would come out periodically and check on the companies and stuff, and the broader picture, no, I don't really ever feel like I had a good grasp. But like I said, I was a Lance Corporal, so I was like an E3, and what do we need to know? We need to know what we're told to do, and that's about it. But essentially, I mean, like, I feel like the broader picture was basically to turn control of the country to the Iraqis, which, you know, I think we did pretty successfully.
All right. Was there still, as far as you could tell, an Al-Qaeda presence or whatever? There still was?
Yeah, I mean, we had our wanted list when we showed up in country, and by the end, we had either captured or killed them all. So, all the ones that we knew about, you know. So, we were pretty successful on that front.
All right.
A lot of capturing, though. More, I feel like at times we would joke that we're just policemen, because that was kind of, I mean, which is understandable because you don't get info from dead people, really. So.
Now, were you actually going into houses and arresting people, or was someone else doing that?
It was, well, a lot of times we would accompany, like, the Iraqis, and the first few times we would do it and clear the house and search and stuff. But it was just a lot easier, I think, culturally, to have an Iraqi come kick your door in versus an American, because then, you know, they don't see you as the invader, and we're just, and we would just start accompany them as sort of like backup in case they'd get in some sort of trouble they couldn't handle.
Okay. And I don't know, did you have problems with snipers or people shooting at you?
Not so much on my deployment. When my unit, because I mean, I left right after my unit was coming back, but when they were there, that was a really, really big problem. But we found a lot of sniper rifles, but it wasn't as prevalent. I mean, you'd hear about it, not my company, but you'd hear about it throughout the AO, like somebody had gotten, like a sniper taking a shot at people. But I think they were getting a lot less well-trained, and it was just like normal people probably trying to use it more often because they weren't hitting anything. So, which, I mean, is good for us. We were happy with that.
Now, how long were you over there?
7 months.
Okay. And what are the living conditions like there for you as a Marine?
It was no palace, that's for sure. We had like wood homes. I mean, they were like huts basically with a bunch of bunk beds built into the wall. And I mean, it was hot, just really hot. I remember like the first few months we had no air conditioning, and somehow our supply officer managed to finagle a couple units of air conditioning from a unit leaving or something, and that was like the greatest thing I'd ever felt. It was nice. I mean, it didn't matter how hot it was during the day, you know, and you'd sweat all over the place when you're on patrol, but you knew, like, if you knew that there was a chance, I mean, sometimes they wouldn't work, but if there's a chance that you could get cooled off a little bit, you were going to take it, and it was nice.
All right, and how were they feeding you?
We got fed. There was lunch and dinner were the two meals but it was weird because we always seemed to be on patrol during that time. But I mean, like, depending on where you were, there's the chow halls from wherever would send out like hamburgers and stuff. So our base ended up having a grill on it. So or you just make a grill, you know, and do that.
So you weren't just living on MREs or something like that?
No, for a while we did. And some of the bigger, I mean, they're basically big versions of MREs too, is what they'd feed us. So that's when the, like, grilling the hot dog, and there was only one kind of bratwurst, and I hate bratwurst now, but at the time it was like, well, it's either this MRE or a bratwurst. I'll take a bratwurst, you know? So.
You're just kind of living like that. All right, and you said at some point you were based out at like an Iraqi police station?
Well, I personally wasn't, but we had people there. And it was, I mean, it was literally like 2 buildings in the middle of nowhere that they'd run through missions with and get intel and stuff and then feed it back to us. And then there were a series of smaller bases, FOBs, forward operating bases and things like that, that we'd work out of every once in a while.
Okay, and then would you stay overnight in some of those?
They were about roughly like week posts, so the company would stay there, or the platoons would stay there for about a week and then rotate through those. So you'd go to like 1, 2, back to our our Howes, which was a tiny little base anyways, because we moved off of Habbaniyah. Habbaniyah was great because it had like all the amenities and things like that, and then we moved out to middle of nowhere into like a makeshift, like our walls were,
Right.
you know, mounds of dirt, and then that was like the place you wanted to be compared to the other places we were at. So it's all perspective, I guess.
All right. Now, when you went over there, did you know how long you were going to be staying?
The Marine Corps sends you for roughly about 7 months is typical, is the average, especially for the reserve side. It's so expensive to keep a reserve unit activated for more than a year that they'll do everything they can to make sure you hit that 7 months, from what I've been told.
Although they do have a habit of recycling some of the reserve units and sending them out again for another tour. And
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the typical cycle was supposed to be after you deploy, it's like 5 years, you know, before you'd go, and it was like 2, 3 sometimes for some units.
Right. Okay. Now, if you look back over the 7 months in Iraq, are there particular events or incidents that kind of stand out in your memory that you kind of haven't brought into the story yet?
Well, I mean, like, I remember when we first got there, the Iraqi police hadn't been paid, so they abandoned their post. So one of our first times ever leaving, we actually had to go across the Euphrates to guard the bridge crossing so they wouldn't go blow up the station. I mean, we went across on ferries, but there was a launching point that we had to make sure was secure for when we, you know, because it was right across from the base and they could just shoot right in. So I remember one of those, and then that was like the first time we'd ever actually taken like heard any shots in country either, and like that was pretty interesting. But for the most part, I mean, like, it was a really, we were lucky, I guess. It's lucky, it's sad to say, when you only had 2 KIAs, but as far as the war went, like, our battalion was almost untouched, you know.
And were the casualties from IEDs or?
Yeah, they got 2 guys, not in my company, but they got killed from an IED, and then another guy was seriously wounded. So, and that was on Mother's Day. So hopefully, I just remember that because we couldn't call home, and we were all like, everybody was saying, man, I hope they just take a little bit longer to get there and tell her the day after, because you know everybody's waiting for us to call them, and that's not what you want. So,
now, were you able to communicate with home on any kind of regular basis while you were over there?
it was easier than we thought it would be. Oh, sorry. It was definitely easier than we thought it would be. They had a lot of satellite phones, and they had set up an internet station that you could go to. I mean, it wasn't always working, but more often than not, you could probably get a hold of them when you wanted to. So.
All right. And are they providing entertainment for you at the bases you're staying at, or is it pretty simple or primitive in those?
No. Like, TQ would have something, but we were like an hour away from that, so I mean, we had nothing. We were burning trash and other things, so. Yeah, it was kind of how I envisioned it, a little bit nicer even than I had thought when I was going over. But
all right, now you get to the end of the 7 months and so forth. Now you're redeploying back. Do you stay kind of on active duty after you get out of Iraq, or do they send everybody home right away?
we got home, and then